Welcome back to the King's Corner, the place for all things Bethesda. I am the KingFanMan. And if you love Fallout and Bethesda games and you're not a subscriber yet to the KingFanMan channel, why not? Go ahead, hit that subscribe button. Today we continue our search for the scariest places in Fallout 76. We go to a very cool place near Talcott, West Virginia, the Big Bend Tunnel.
The Big Bend Tunnel, also known as the Great Bend Tunnel, is located just west of Talcott, West Virginia, and 10 miles east of Hinton, West Virginia. The name Great Bend, or Big Bend, is named after a section of the Greenbrier River where it literally makes a big bend around Big Bend Mountain. In 1870, the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad, also known as the C&O Railroad, was laying track in the area and had to decide if they were going to lay the track around the mountain or go through the mountain. This big bend around the mountain was about 8 miles. To go through the mountain, it would still be over a mile. It is reported that the railroad was under a tight timetable to finish. Some also report that each worker was promised land to make a homestead if, and only if, they finished the project by a certain date. With many of the workers on the railroad being freed slaves with little or no possessions of their own, this was a huge opportunity. So the decision was made to tunnel through the mountain instead of going around. But this was not going to be a small task. In fact, it would become one of the largest projects ever undertaken by the C&O Railroad. Making this project even more difficult was the fact that they had little to no heavy equipment or technology in the late 1800s. Approximately 800 workers began work on the Big Bend Tunnel, and they used dynamite that was hand-drilled and then used mules to move the rock out of place. So needless to say, this would be a very tough and labor-intensive project to complete. Once the construction began in 1870, they soon realized the mountain's hard shale rock resisted drilling and blasting, and then once exposed to the air, it became very brittle, so rock falls and cave-ins became common, killing many of the workers throughout the project. At one point, over 22 million pounds of rock dropped in one huge fall near the east end of the tunnel. Each worker was paid $1.25 a day, plus, as said before, the promise of land if finished in time. This was actually a pretty good wage for the time, but the dangers of the job kept many away. This is one reason that many of the 800 workers were former slaves looking for a job. It took 2 years of painstaking and deadly work just to break through to the other side of the mountain, which they did on May 31st, 1872. It would take another full year of work before the first train would be able to pass through the 1.25-mile tunnel, or over 6,450 feet long, and at the time, it was the longest train tunnel in the United States. Because of the fragile and falling rock, the tunnel was eventually lined with wood timbers in an attempt to keep rock slides and cave-ins from happening. Sadly, though, the timbers failed several times. In 1875, a major accident was recorded by the Shreveport Times. Over 30 foot of the roof of the tunnel fell, and tragically, it fell on a train engine that was passing through the tunnel. The train engine struck a low-hanging piece of the roof of the tunnel, and a massive amount of rock weighing several tons came crashing down on the train. The fireman was instantly killed, and the engineer was severely injured, later dying from his wounds. In fact, that entire train crew all eventually died from this accident. It was because of this accident that the C&O Railroad began to line the tunnel with brick instead of the falling timbers. It took 10 years and more than 6 million bricks to complete. It was actually during this 10-year period that the reports of spooky things like ghosts were first reported, but more on that in just a minute. First, with all the accidents and workers' deaths that we have already mentioned, I would be remiss if I didn't tell you about the most famous death ever recorded in this tunnel. The famous folk hero John Henry is alleged to have died while working on the Big Bend Tunnel. He is even reported to be buried very close to the opening of the tunnel. Now, if you have never heard of John Henry, he is a legend who has been immortalized in songs, films, TV, and even cartoons. Even though he has become bigger than life, that doesn't mean he wasn't a real person. It is said he came to the C&O Railroad wanting a job, but was told by the foreman that they were full and didn't need help at that time. Now, John was a freed slave who really needed the work. It is said that John asked the foreman that if he could hammer in 3 railroad spikes fully with only 3 swings, could he have the job? Well, intrigued and extremely doubtful, the foreman agreed, since it took an average worker 3 to 5 swings to get a railroad spike fully down. John, swinging his 20-pound hammer with all his power, proceeded to nail all 3 spikes with only 1 swing each. The foreman was shocked and amazed, and he hired John on the spot. He became famous among the workers for his speed, his strength, and how hard he worked. John Henry was hired as a steel driving man. He would literally drive steel spikes or steel drill bits into the rock so that they could put the dynamite down in the holes and blast it away. Now, it is reported that late in the construction process, an agent for a steam drill company brought a steam drill to the project, hoping he could make a sale to the foreman. The foreman, who was under extreme pressure from the C&O Railroad to get the project finished as fast as possible, he thought this drill could help finish quicker. However, the workers saw the steam drill not as a help to them, but as a threat of taking their jobs away. It is said that John Henry, with encouragement from all the workers, bet the foreman that he could outwork the steam drill. And the bet was simple. If John beats the steam drill, the foreman wouldn't purchase the drill. But if the drill wins, then the drill would take the place of many of the workers. Now, accounts of the contest vary some according to who is telling the story. Some say the contest went for a full day. Others say it only lasted 30 minutes to an hour. What people do agree on is that the contest would see who could drive steel deeper and faster into the hard rock. Remember, the steel would be driven deep into the rock so that dynamite could later be dropped down the holes that were left from the steel drills. So the agent of the steam drill lined it up and got it ready to begin. John Henry lined up right beside the drill with his shaker. Now, a shaker was the men that hold the spikes for the steel driving men. They were called shakers because between strikes of the hammer, they would shake the drill bit to get it past any loose rock or dirt so that the bit would be in the best position for the next hammer strike. In the famous song, The Ballad of John Henry, just before the contest, John promises if he cannot beat the steam drill, that he would die with his hammer in his hand. So there stood Big John holding 2 sledgehammers, one in each hand, and was ready to win or die trying. The foreman shouted, "Go!" and the contest was on. The steam drill steadily drilling down through the rock, while Big John, the biggest, fastest, and strongest worker, was lightning fast, never pausing a second as he swung those 2 massive hammers. Now again, however long the contest actually was, no one may ever know. But we do know that when the contest was finally stopped, the steam drill had gone down 9 feet into the hard rock. Then they checked John Henry's work, and he had drilled down 14 feet. The workers shouted in celebration as John had beaten the steam drill by 5 feet. Now, it is said as everyone looked around to find John to congratulate him, he had walked to the tunnel opening to sit down and rest. But when the workers found him, he was dead, apparently from exhaustion or maybe even a heart attack. He sat slumped over at the tunnel's opening, and yes, his hammer was in his hand. Even though he died in the process, John had won the contest, and it is said that the foreman honored it, and he turned down purchasing a steel drill for the project. And documented history actually backs up this fact, because it is known that no steel drills were ever used in the construction of the Big Bend Tunnel. Now, I must include here the facts that this story has grown and grown, and the legend has spread as inspiration for the working man and also for the freed slaves. John became their Superman, their proof that they were as important or more important than the new machines that were coming to every line of work. In fact, this legend got so big that several places in the United States actually claim today to be the location of the real John Henry. Alabama claims it, Virginia claims it, and several tunnels in West Virginia claim it as well. But most agree on the Big Bend Tunnel in West Virginia to be the true place of the legend of John Henry. Today, in fact, there stands a statue honoring the steel driving man right there in front of the east end of the Big Bend Tunnel, along with markers telling his story and even claiming to be close to the burial spot of John. Just as the song says, he was buried by the Big Bend Tunnel in the sand. And yes, as you go closer to the Greenbrier River from Big Bend Tunnel, the sandy ground is evident. There have also been eyewitness testimony of people who met John and who actually watched the contest. One such witness is a man named Neil Miller. Mr. Miller stated that he came to the tunnel with his father when he was only 17 years old, and they were both seeking work. Mr. Miller said he not only had met John, but knew him very well, having worked with him for over a year. He said John took great pride in his work, and he said that he remembers the day that the agent came showing off that steam drill, and it was John who went to the foreman, and it was John's idea because he wanted to drive against that machine. Mr. Miller described the contest in great detail and confirmed that John did die that very day, and they also buried him close to the tunnel's entrance because John had no family and no resources to afford a funeral. So he was buried by the tunnel that took his life. Now, sadly, the C&O Railroad had their records on the Big Bend Tunnel destroyed by a fire. So we do have to rely on the eyewitnesses to confirm this legend. There's also another reason why the Big Bend Tunnel is considered to be the real place of the John Henry legend. Witnesses from that time, immediately after John's death, started reporting seeing and hearing what they thought was John's ghost in the tunnel. By this we know that the people of the area, and more importantly the workers from that time, all say that the story of John Henry is true, and it is true at the Big Bend Tunnel in West Virginia. One such witness was a man named Alfred Owens, a lifelong resident of the area and a brick mason who was hired to line the Big Bend Tunnel with brick. Mr. Owens stated that one afternoon while working on the tunnel, he heard a noise, and at first paid no attention, thinking the sound probably came from a rock falling. But a few minutes later, he said he heard the noise again, but this time he could hear a series of clanking noises. Mr. Owens said it sounded like a hammer hitting steel. Owens looked in the direction of the sound, and he was startled to see a shadowy figure just feet away from him, silhouetted by the entrance of the tunnel. Mr. Owens said that he inched toward the figure, not knowing if it was a worker or just someone who had wandered in, as he knew there was no one supposed to be working on that end of the tunnel with him. As he got closer, he could see the silhouette of a man who appeared to be swinging a hammer, making that clanking sound each time as if he was hitting steel. Mr. Owens, now only a few feet from the figure, said he had a strange feeling of a tingling all over his body as he watched this man hammer. Suddenly, a small rock over Mr. Owens' head became loose and fell, striking him on the shoulder. It rattled him so much that he lost his footing and fell forward, landing right at the feet of the figure that he had been watching. Mr. Owen said that he was almost too scared to look up, but when he had gathered his courage, he lifted his head, and the figure was gone. It had disappeared without a sound. It was at that time Mr. Owen said he realized that he had probably just seen Big John Henry doing what he loved to do. Now, there were many more reports from crews working during that 10-year period of bricking the roof of the tunnel of scary and unusual things. The Great Bend or Big Bend Tunnel remained in service from 1872 until 1974, when its sister tunnel, also named the Big Bend Tunnel, was later opened alongside it. Now, many of the spooky sounds and sights that had been reported were reported inside the tunnel or just outside, and too many to number have reported the sound of steel being hit. Workers, train employees, park officials, people from the town, and even tourists have all reported this strange sound coming from inside the tunnel. Is this really the sound of John Henry still hammering steel? If you say no, I should add that many have tried to find a rational reason for this noise, but nothing of this world has ever been found. Now, maybe the most credible witnesses have been the train crews down through the years who routinely went through this tunnel until its closure in 1974. When asked, many of the train crews admittedly dreaded going through the Big Bend Tunnel. Several crews have reported seeing shadowy figures on the tracks, but when the train would reach the figure, it would be gone. One such engineer stated that he would either close his eyes or just watch the gauges while inside the tunnel. When asked why, all he would say was, "I don't want to see anything again." So the Big Bend Tunnel stands today as a mighty achievement of man, but one that cost so many lives, either by the falling rocks or by the many other dangers of the tunnel. One such danger was silica dust, which cost many of those original workers their lives. In fact, it is estimated that almost 1,000 lives were eventually lost from workers inside the tunnel. All of these workers, including John Henry, should all be honored for their work, their accomplishment, and their sacrifice. And that is just what the people of West Virginia and in the local area have done, and they continue to do it every year. Even though the Big Bend Tunnel sits today as a decommissioned tunnel on the main line of the CSX rail line, it is a place that many come from far and wide to see. There is even a festival every year called John Henry Days. It is a 3-day festival held on the second weekend of July. It begins on Friday night with a concert at the stage near the Great Bend Tunnel, and it ends on Sunday with a rubber duck race at the Talcott Bridge over the Greenbrier River. They come to honor John and all the workers that sacrificed their lives to give us this mighty achievement. The tunnel may not be in use today by the railroad, but is someone or something still calling it home? Well, many witnesses from its beginning until today say yes. Maybe it is John. Maybe every time that steel is heard, he is reminding us that machines can never truly replace what mankind has, and that is our spirit. Well, if all that is true, then I say, you keep on hammering, John. Keep on hammering.